There are moments in life when nothing dramatic happens, no loud argument, no shocking revelation, yet something inside you quietly shifts. You meet someone briefly, a shopkeeper, a fellow traveler, a stranger introduced through a friend. The exchange is polite, ordinary, almost forgettable, and yet as you walk away, a feeling lingers. You can't explain it, but you know something. Perhaps you felt at ease, as if the space around that person softened. Or perhaps you felt unsettled, even though they smiled and spoke kindly. You replay the moment later, searching for a reason. They said the right things. They behaved appropriately. So why did your heart respond before your mind could? Most people dismiss these moments. They call them coincidence, mood, imagination. But what if these quiet impressions are not accidents at all? What if they are part of how human beings have always perceived one another, long before psychology gave it language? Imam J, a letter 2 BF, F, a R, al letter 1E63 a macron DIQ, lived in a world without cameras, profiles, or curated identities. People could not edit themselves the way they do today. Yet even then, appearances were never the full story. He taught that the human face is not merely a biological feature. It is a surface where the inner life slowly leaves its trace. Not instantly, not dramatically, but patiently over time. When people hear the phrase 3 seconds, they imagine something sudden or extraordinary. But Imam J, a letter 2 BF, F, a R, did not mean a stopwatch moment. He was pointing to something subtler, how quickly truth is felt before it is analyzed, before the mind begins to explain things away, before politeness, habit, or desire interferes. Think about how quickly you recognize fear in a child's face, or exhaustion in someone who has been carrying too much for too long. You don't calculate it. You don't study their features. You simply see. That seeing happens before thought, and that is where its honesty lies. Imam J, a letter 2 BF, F, a R, was not teaching people how to judge others. He was teaching them how to notice reality without distortion. He warned that the danger is not seeing too much. It is seeing without humility. Because when awareness is mixed with ego, it becomes accusation. And when awareness is mixed with compassion, it becomes understanding. In everyday life, we already trust this kind of perception more than we admit. You trust a doctor not only because of their words, but because of the calm in their presence. You trust a friend not only because of promises, but because their face does not shift when circumstances change. And sometimes, you distrust someone without knowing why, until time quietly confirms what you sensed at the beginning. The face Imam J, a letter 2 BF, F, a R, taught does not lie deliberately. It simply records years of restraint or indulgence, years of sincerity or performance, years of inner conflict or inner reconciliation. These do not announce themselves loudly. They whisper through the eyes, the mouth, the posture of attention. This is why he insisted that such awareness is not a trick to be learned, but a responsibility to be carried. Because once you begin to notice, you can no longer pretend you didn't feel what you felt. And that raises a deeper question, not about others, but about yourself. If faces reflect inner states over time, then what might your own face be quietly expressing? Not to strangers, but to those who know you well. Not in moments of control, but in moments of rest. And if the human face truly holds traces of the soul's journey, then perhaps the question is not how quickly we see, but whether we are willing to see without rushing to conclusions. Because before Imam J, a letter 2 BF, F, a R, ever spoke about reading others, he spoke about something more difficult, learning to sit with what is revealed, without turning it into judgment. And that is where the real journey begins. Imam J, a letter 2 BF, F, a R, al letter 1E63 a macron DIQ, began not with faces, but with a principle so simple it is often overlooked. Nothing that lives inside a human being remains hidden forever. Thoughts may begin in silence, emotions may rise and fall unseen, intentions may stay unspoken. But when they are repeated, when they become a way of living, they slowly shape the person who carries them. We already accept this truth in ordinary life. A person who spends years under physical strain develops marks on the body. A person who lives with chronic stress begins to carry it in their posture and voice. In the same way, Imam Jafar taught, the inner world leaves impressions on the outer form, not through sudden change, but through accumulation. A single moment of anger passes, but anger that is returned to day after day begins to settle. It tightens the jaw, it sharpens the gaze, it teaches the face how to hold itself. A single moment of fear fades, but fear that becomes a companion reshapes the eyes, makes them restless, always scanning for threat. And a single moment of sincerity may be forgotten, but sincerity lived consistently gives the face a quiet ease that no performance can imitate. This is why Imam Jafar made a careful distinction between temporary expressions and permanent impressions. Everyone frowns sometimes. Everyone smiles without meaning it at least once. These moments are not what reveal a person's inner state. What reveals them is repetition. What a person returns to again and again eventually asks to be seen. Ibn Arabi would later echo this understanding when he wrote that the human being is not divided into inner and outer, but woven from both at the same time. What you think affects how you feel. What you feel affects how you act. And what you act upon shapes who you become. Over time, the face becomes less a mask and more a mirror. The Quran speaks of faces being brightened or darkened, often understood as an image of the hereafter. But Imam Jafar taught that this is also a law already at work in this life, not in a way that labels people, but in a way that reflects states. Peace leaves a trace. Inner conflict leaves another. Trust and resentment do not settle in the same way. This does not mean that suffering makes a person dark or that hardship ruins the face. Many faces marked by hardship carry a softness that comes only from endurance. Imam Jafar emphasized that it is not pain that shapes the face most deeply, it is how pain is carried. Resentment hardens, acceptance softens, despair clouds, hope clarifies. You may have seen this without realizing it. Two people endure similar trials. One becomes closed and bitter. The other becomes quieter, gentler, more spacious. Their stories may be similar, but their faces tell different truths. Not because one life was easier, but because one heart found a way to surrender where the other continued to resist. This is why Imam Jafar warned against reading moments instead of patterns. A single conversation tells you very little. A single glance can mislead. But the face shaped by years of inner habit speaks in a different language, one that does not need words. And this principle leads to something uncomfortable, yet necessary. If inner states leave outer traces, then the face is not only something we present to the world. It is something we are constantly writing upon without noticing. The question then is not how well we can read others. The deeper question is this: what inner states are you returning to each day? Which emotions are you feeding? Which thoughts are you rehearsing? Because long before they become visible to anyone else, they are already shaping you. And if the face records the soul's habits over time, then learning to see is not about speed. It is about understanding what the face has been patiently recording all along. Imam Jafar al-1E63a Macron DIQ did not teach his students to isolate features or reduce a human being to fragments. He warned against that kind of thinking. A face, he said, must be read as a whole, because the human being is whole. Still, he observed that certain regions of the face tend to carry the imprint of particular inner activities, not as fixed rules, but as patterns that emerge over time. He described the face as having three broad regions, each quietly reflecting a different aspect of the self. These regions do not speak independently. They speak together, like verses that only make sense when read in context. The upper region, the forehead and the area around the eyes, tends to reflect the life of the mind and the direction of belief. This is where thinking leaves its trace, not intelligence in the abstract, but how a person thinks, whether the mind is restless or settled, whether thoughts circle anxiously or move with trust. A mind that is always bracing for loss eventually teaches the brow to tighten. A mind that has learned reliance teaches it to rest. The middle region, the nose and cheeks, often carries the climate of emotion. What a person feels habitually, not occasionally. Suppressed grief, unresolved resentment, quiet contentment, or steady gratitude all find different ways of showing themselves here. This is not about beauty or ugliness. It is about flow. Some faces feel rigid, as if emotion has been held back for too long. Others feel open, even when the person says very little. The lower region, the mouth and jaw, tends to reflect will and discipline. Not what a person claims to value, but what they actually restrain or indulge. A life lived in constant self-correction often tightens this area. A life lived without restraint leaves it lax in a different way. And a life lived in alignment, where intention and action are not at war, often carries a quiet balance that does not need to assert itself. Imam J. a letter to Jafar emphasized that none of these regions should ever be read in isolation. A tense mouth does not make someone false. A heavy brow does not make someone faithless. What matters is coherence. Do the regions tell the same story, or are they contradicting one another? When the face speaks in harmony, there is usually inner integration. When it speaks in fragments, there is often inner conflict. Ibn Arabi would later describe this as the difference between unity and dispersion within the self. When thoughts, emotions, and actions are aligned, the human being becomes internally spacious. When they are divided, tension appears, not because the person is immoral, but because the soul is stretched in opposing directions. You may notice this in everyday encounters. Someone speaks confidently, but their jaw remains tight, as if holding something back. Another person speaks very little, yet their presence feels complete, as if nothing is being hidden. These impressions do not come from analysis. They come from the face speaking in one voice, or in many. This is why Imam J. a letter to Jafar taught patience before interpretation. He encouraged his students to observe over time, not to conclude quickly. A single meeting may show stress. Repeated meetings reveal character. The face becomes clearer when seen across moments, not frozen in one. And slowly the student learns something humbling. The face does not reveal perfection. It reveals process. It shows where a person is in motion, not where they have finished. Every face carries contradiction. Every face carries effort. This understanding prepares the ground for the most revealing feature of all, not because it is dramatic, but because it is difficult to conceal. The place where presence comes closest to the surface. The place Imam J. a letter to Jafar urged his students to study last, not first. The eyes. Because before words form, before expressions settle, the eyes have already answered a question most people never ask. Is this person at peace with what lives inside them, or still at war with it? Imam J. a letter to Jafar al letter 1E63a Macron DIQ taught that if a person learned to read nothing else, they should learn to read the eyes, not in a dramatic way, not as a skill to impress others, but because the eyes are the place where the inner life comes closest to being seen without disguise. Words can be chosen, expressions can be managed, posture can be rehearsed, but the eyes respond before control fully arrives. They react to fear, relief, guilt, sincerity, and presence in ways that are difficult to hide for long. This is not because people are dishonest, but because the soul moves faster than the mask. You may have experienced this without realizing it. You speak with someone, and while their words are careful, their eyes feel absent, as if they are somewhere else entirely. Or you meet someone who says very little, yet their gaze feels steady, receptive, and strangely calming. In those moments, you are not responding to information. You are responding to presence. Imam J. a letter to Jafar described the eyes as a threshold. On one side is the inner world, intentions, beliefs, unresolved struggles. On the other side is the outer world, interaction, speech, behavior. At this crossing point, what lives inside has very little time to reorganize itself before it is seen. He spoke of clarity in the eyes not as brightness or physical sharpness, but as transparency. Eyes that allow you to feel that nothing is being hidden behind them. When such eyes meet yours, there is no sense of calculation. You feel met, not assessed. Seen, not measured. This quality, he taught, often comes from a heart that has made peace with Allah, not because the person is flawless, but because they are no longer divided against themselves. Ibn Arabi would later describe this as the light of presence. Not a mystical glow, but a stillness that allows perception to be clean. When the heart is preoccupied with defending itself, the eyes become restless. When the heart is carrying unresolved guilt or fear, the eyes may appear clouded, not physically, but energetically, as if something is moving constantly beneath the surface. There are also eyes that feel hard, not angry, not fearful, simply closed. Imam Jaʿfar warned that this is the most difficult state to reach and the most difficult to leave. It is the state of someone who has numbed themselves, who no longer struggles with their conscience because they have learned to silence it. These eyes do not flicker with doubt. They stare, and their stillness does not bring peace. Yet even here, Imam Jaʿfar urged restraint. Hard eyes are not a verdict. They are a signal of distance, from compassion, from vulnerability, from inner questioning. The proper response is not condemnation, but caution. He also taught his students to notice movement. Eyes that move excessively often reveal inner disturbance. But the reason matters. Fearful eyes dart and return, searching for reassurance. Deceptive eyes dart and avoid, seeking escape. The difference is subtle, and it can only be recognized over time, not in a single glance. What mattered most to Imam Jaʿfar was not technique, but congruence. Do the eyes agree with the rest of the face? Do they confirm what the words are saying, or quietly contradict them? When the eyes and the voice tell different stories, the eyes are usually closer to the truth. And yet, he reminded his students of something even more important. The eyes reveal as much about the one who is looking as about the one being seen, because perception itself is shaped by the heart. A heart clouded by suspicion will see threat everywhere. A heart softened by humility will see struggle where others see fault. This is why Imam Jaʿfar insisted that reading the eyes begins with guarding one's own inner state. Because the clearest eyes in the world will tell you nothing if your own sight is distorted. And once the eyes have spoken, something else quietly joins the conversation, often without words. The place where truth struggles with control, where sincerity and performance begin to diverge. The mouth. Imam Jaʿfar al-1E63a Macron DIQ taught that the mouth reveals truth not through speech, but through effort. Anyone can learn to choose their words carefully. Anyone can rehearse what to say and when to say it. But the muscles around the mouth remember how much restraint is required to maintain that control. When a person's inner truth and outer speech are aligned, the mouth rests naturally. There is no constant pressure, no silent bracing. Silence feels as honest as speech. Imam Jaʿfar said that such a mouth belongs to someone who does not need to negotiate with themselves before speaking. What lives inside them is allowed to exist without fear. But when there is distance between what is felt and what is said, tension begins to gather. The lips press together more often. The jaw tightens without reason. Corners of the mouth pull downward, not from sadness but from effort. This is not a sign of deceit in a moral sense. Often, it is the sign of someone who has learned to survive by filtering themselves too carefully. You may recognize this in ordinary moments. Someone listens while you speak, nodding politely, but their jaw is clenched as if holding back a response already prepared. They are not present, they are waiting. Another person listens quietly, their mouth relaxed, occasionally moving in small signs of acknowledgement. You feel heard even before they respond. The difference is not in manners, it is in inner availability. Imam Jafar also warned his students to notice incongruence. A smile that appears only in the mouth while the eyes remain unchanged often signals performance rather than feeling. A genuine smile engages the entire face. It spreads. It softens. It does not rush to appear or disappear. False warmth requires effort. True warmth does not. Over time, habitual patterns leave subtle marks. Someone who frequently speaks against their own convictions develops a different facial memory than someone who lives with integrity, even when it costs them comfort. Ibn Arabi wrote that when the heart is divided, the body carries the burden of that division. The mouth becomes a site where conflict is quietly stored. Imam Jafar observed that chronic inner contradiction can even create slight asymmetry over years, not in a dramatic way, but in movement. One side of the mouth tightens more than the other. One side smiles more easily. These are not signs to accuse or diagnose. They are traces of a life lived in negotiation rather than clarity. He reminded his students that the mouth also reveals how a person relates to power. Some people raise their voice to dominate space, not because they are strong, but because they fear being questioned. Others speak softly, not from weakness, but from confidence that they do not need to force attention. Volume alone reveals nothing. Motivation reveals everything. And then there is silence. The way a mouth rests when a person is not speaking often tells more than words ever could. A relaxed silence suggests ease with oneself. A tense silence suggests rehearsal. A guarded silence suggests fear of exposure. Imam Jafar emphasized again and again, this knowledge is not for collecting flaws. It is for understanding strain. When you see tension in the mouth, you are often seeing someone who has learned to protect themselves, sometimes for good reason. This is why he insisted that awareness must be paired with mercy, because the mouth that strains to control itself is often the mouth of someone who has not yet found a place where truth feels safe. And above the mouth, beyond the eyes, another record continues to form quietly over years, the record of thought itself. The place where worry, trust, and surrender leave their softest marks. The forehead. Imam Jafar al-1E63a Macron DIQ taught that the forehead is not a symbol of intelligence, but a record of relationship, specifically, the relationship a person has with their own thoughts. Not what they think about, but how they think. How tightly the mind holds, how often it braces, how rarely it rests. A mind that is constantly preparing for loss learns to tense itself. A mind that believes it must control every outcome learns to furrow. Over years, these movements repeat until they no longer require effort. The forehead remembers what the heart has not yet released. Imam Jafar distinguished between lines earned through living and lines formed through strain. Life leaves marks on everyone. Grief, responsibility, and experience all write their signatures on the face. These lines are not signs of imbalance. They are signs of having lived awake. But premature tension, marks that appear too early or too deeply, often reflects a mind that has carried more than it could surrender. Vertical lines between the brows, he observed, often come from repeated concentration under pressure, from vigilance, from anger restrained rather than resolved. The person is always leaning forward mentally, always preparing to respond, always holding the world in place through effort. This does not mean they lack faith. Often, it means their faith has not yet taught them how to rest. Horizontal lines forming across the forehead often appear when surprise, concern, or worry becomes habitual. Raised eyebrows once fade. Raised eyebrows repeated over years begin to stay. Imam Jafar reminded his students not to confuse hardship with failure. Many people suffer deeply yet remain inwardly spacious. What shapes the forehead is not what happens, but how long the mind resists what happens. Ibn Arabi spoke of taslim, inner surrender, not as passivity but as alignment. A mind that surrenders does not stop thinking, it stops fighting itself. Planning continues but anxiety loosens its grip. Reflection deepens but obsession releases. When this shift occurs, the face does not become blank, it becomes open. Imam Jafar also taught his students to notice visibility. Some people unconsciously hide their forehead through posture, hair, or habitual covering. This does not indicate deception. Often it reflects vulnerability, a reluctance to be seen fully. Others allow their forehead to remain open without concern, signaling a comfort with exposure, a lack of inner defense. Again, he cautioned, these are not conclusions, they are invitations to understand. A covered forehead may belong to someone healing. An open forehead may belong to someone unaware. No single sign speaks alone. What matters is coherence. Does the forehead agree with the eyes? Does the calm of the gaze align with the tension of thought? When the face speaks in harmony, there is often inner settlement. When it speaks in contrast, there is usually an unfinished conversation within. And yet, Imam Jafar insisted that even this is not the final layer. The face, after all, is still form. Beneath form, something arrives before sight has time to interpret it. Something you feel before you think. A presence that enters the room before words, before expressions, before judgment. This is the layer he warned about most, because it cannot be analyzed, only sensed. And it is where the responsibility of seeing becomes heaviest. Imam Jafar al-1E63a Macron DIQ taught that the most important thing you perceive about a person is often the least visible. Before you study a face, before you register expressions or gestures, something reaches you first. A subtle shift in your own body, a quiet reaction that happens without language. You enter a room and feel at ease though nothing has been said, or you feel guarded though no threat is visible. Your breathing changes, your chest either opens or tightens, your thoughts slow or scatter. Imam Jafar insisted that these reactions are not imagination. They are perception operating below the level of analysis. This is what he connected to spiritual insight, not as a supernatural ability, but as a refinement of awareness. The soul reads before the mind explains, and when the mind learns to listen rather than override, clarity deepens. Some people carry a presence that feels expansive. You sit with them and feel more yourself, not because they advise you, but because nothing in you needs to hide. Their presence does not pull attention toward them, it creates space around you. Imam Jafar said this is often the sign of a heart that has been softened by remembrance rather than hardened by certainty. Others carry a presence that contracts the space. Conversation becomes effort. Your thoughts become foggy. You find yourself agreeing just to restore ease. Nothing overt has happened, yet something feels heavy. Imam Jafar warned his students to pay attention to this, not to judge the person, but to protect themselves. Presence reveals inner climate more honestly than appearance. There are also those whose presence creates confusion. You leave the interaction unsure of what was said, unsure of what you felt, unsure of your own clarity. Imam Jafar described this as internal chaos spilling outward. The person may not intend harm, but their lack of inner grounding makes proximity disorienting. Ibn Arabi wrote that the heart perceives realities long before the intellect forms opinions, but he also warned that perception is shaped by the perceiver. A heart burdened with suspicion will feel threatened everywhere. A heart softened by humility will feel tenderness even in flawed people. This is why Imam Jafar taught his students to observe their own reactions as carefully as they observed others. When you feel contracted, ask why. When you feel drawn, ask why. Awareness without self-examination becomes projection. He also emphasized a crucial truth. Presence can deceive when charisma replaces sincerity. Some people learn to project warmth without carrying it. Others carry light quietly, unnoticed by those seeking spectacle. This is why presence must be observed over time, not consumed in moments. Imam Jafar taught that the body often knows before the mind dares to admit. Tightness in the chest, shallow breath, a subtle urge to step back. These are not commands but signals. Ignoring them repeatedly teaches the soul to go silent. And yet, he warned of another danger, becoming obsessed with reading others while remaining blind to oneself. The greatest test of presence is not how you feel around others, but how others feel around you. Do people relax in your presence or brace themselves? Do conversations soften or harden? Does clarity increase or confusion spread? These are not judgments, they are mirrors. Because before Imam Jafar ever taught his students how to sense others, he taught them something far more difficult: to become responsible for what they themselves carry into a space. And this is where the knowledge becomes heavy, because to see clearly is to carry restraint, to sense deeply is to choose mercy. Which is why Imam Jafar did not offer this understanding freely. He guarded it carefully, not because it was rare, but because it demands a heart capable of bearing what it reveals. And that leads to the question he asked every student before teaching them further: what will you do with what you see? Imam Jafar al-1E63a Macron Diq was careful, almost severe, about who he taught this understanding to. Not because it was secret, and not because it was mystical, but because it carried weight. To see more clearly is not a privilege. It is a responsibility, and responsibility, when placed in an unprepared heart, becomes harm. He warned that the moment insight turns into superiority, it collapses into ignorance. When someone begins to say, "I see what others cannot," they have already stopped seeing. Because real perception does not inflate the self, it humbles it. Imam Jafar taught that this kind of awareness gives you access to people's vulnerabilities. You begin to notice where they struggle, where they protect themselves, where they carry unresolved fear or guilt. Without mercy, this awareness becomes judgment. Without humility, it becomes manipulation. And without self-knowledge, it becomes projection. Ibn Arabi described the heart as a mirror. Whatever distortion exists in the mirror will alter what appears in it. If the mirror is clouded by ego, suspicion, or unresolved wounds, then what you see in others will be shaped by your own darkness. You will call it insight, but it will only be reflection. This is why Imam Jafar insisted that before learning to read others, a person must learn to read themselves, to notice their own patterns, their own justifications, their own blind spots, because the human being is quick to condemn in others what they have not yet faced within. He warned especially against one temptation: the desire to expose, to reveal what is hidden and feel powerful because of it. Imam Jafar said that if you perceive something about another person that Allah has not made public, then it is a trust, not a weapon. Revealing it would be a greater failure than the flaw you noticed. This knowledge was never meant to turn human relationships into investigations. It was meant to guide interaction, to help you know when to trust, when to step back, when to offer support, and when silence is the most ethical response. There is also a quieter burden that comes with seeing clearly. When you notice people's inner conflicts, their hidden struggles, their silent battles, it becomes harder to reduce them to labels. Anger begins to look like pain. Control begins to look like fear. Harshness begins to look like self-protection learned too early. Imam Jafar said that some students lost ease in their relationships after gaining insight. They saw too much. They became cautious where they once were relaxed, critical where they once were open. This is why he insisted that compassion must grow faster than perception. Otherwise, clarity becomes isolation. He taught that the goal is not to withdraw from people, but to relate to them more truthfully, to know that every face carries contradiction, that every person is in motion, not finished, that what you see today may not be what remains tomorrow. And so he placed conditions around this understanding, not formal rules but inner ones: patience, humility, restraint, a willingness to let people be unfinished, a refusal to turn insight into identity. Because the moment you believe you are the one who sees, you stop seeing. And the moment you use perception to protect your ego instead of your ethics, the knowledge begins to disappear. Imam J, a letter to Bfar, said that Allah removes insight from those who misuse it, not as punishment, but as mercy. Because a heart that sees without compassion becomes dangerous, first to others and then to itself. This is why he described this understanding as both a gift and a burden. A gift because it allows you to move through life with wisdom. A burden because it requires you to carry others gently, even when you see their flaws. And only then does the final question arise, not about others but about practice. If this awareness is not meant to judge, dominate, or expose, then how is it meant to be lived? That is where Imam J, a letter to Bfar, ended his teaching, not with techniques, but with preparation. And that is where we turn next. Imam J, a letter to Bfar, al letter 1E63a Macron DIQ, taught that insight is not something you take from the world. It is something the world begins to show you once you have learned restraint. And the greatest danger of insight, he warned, is hardness, the slow tightening of the heart that comes from seeing without mercy. This is why he never separated perception from purification. To see clearly, the heart must remain soft. Otherwise, clarity becomes cruelty. The same awareness that helps you navigate relationships can, if mishandled, turn you into someone who looks at people only to measure their flaws. He began with the simplest discipline, tending to your own inner state before observing others. Regular prayer was not described as ritual alone, but as recalibration. Fasting was not deprivation, but loosening the grip of impulse. Repentance was not shame, but cleaning the mirror so reflection could be honest. When the heart is busy defending itself, it cannot see without distortion. Presence was the second discipline. Most people, Imam J, a letter to Bfar, said, are never fully with the person in front of them. They are replaying the past, preparing the next response, or guarding their image. Insight does not arrive in divided attention. It arrives when you are here, breathing, listening, noticing what is actually happening rather than what you expect to happen. He cautioned strongly against observation fueled by suspicion. Watch to understand, not to expose. Notice patterns over time, not moments frozen in judgment. If you sense something uneasy about a person, do not announce it, wait. Let time speak. Reality confirms itself without your help. Ibn Arabi echoed this wisdom when he wrote that true knowledge increases humility, not certainty. If your perception makes you feel superior, it is already corrupted. If it makes you more patient, more careful with words, more generous in interpretation, it is likely aligned. Imam J, a letter to Bfar, also insisted on feedback, quietly over time. Sometimes you will be wrong. Sometimes what you sensed was your own fear, your own projection, your own unresolved history speaking. Insight matures when it is tested against outcomes, not protected by pride. And finally, he taught his students to ask for guidance rather than power, to ask Allah to show truth as truth and falsehood as falsehood, not so they could control others, but so they could walk more safely themselves, to ask for protection from deception, including their own. Because the purpose of seeing is not exposure, it is navigation, knowing when to trust, when to keep distance, when to offer kindness, when to remain silent, when to step away without bitterness. Imam J, a letter to Bfar, reminded his students that every face they read carries a story still unfolding. Every person you meet is somewhere between falling and rising. And if you are allowed to glimpse that process, the correct response is not judgment, but restraint. In the end, he said, insight always turns inward. The same clarity that lets you see others will eventually show you yourself, your contradictions, your defenses, your unfinished work. And when that happens, something changes. Compassion replaces certainty. Mercy replaces accusation. Because you realize then that the face you are learning to read is not only the one in front of you, it is also your own. Imam J, a letter 2 BF, F, a R, al letter 1 E63 a macron DIQ, did not teach people how to read faces so they could feel superior. He taught them so they could feel responsible. Because the more clearly you see others, the more clearly you are eventually forced to see yourself. Every face you encounter is carrying a story you cannot fully know. Every gaze holds both struggle and longing. And every human being, no matter how composed or conflicted they appear, is trying, consciously or not, to find their way back to balance, back to truth, back to Allah. This is why real insight never ends with judgment. It ends with humility. When you recognize signs in others, you begin to recognize them in yourself. The same fear, the same defenses, the same quiet hope that mercy will arrive before exposure does. Perhaps that is the deepest lesson Imam J, a letter 2 BF, FAR left behind. That the purpose of seeing is not to separate yourself from people, but to understand them more gently. To know when to step closer, when to step back, and when to remain silent out of respect for what you do not fully understand. So the next time you meet someone and feel something before a word is spoken, pause. Do not rush to name it. Do not rush to judge it. Ask instead what it is teaching you about awareness, about restraint, about compassion. Have you ever sensed something true about a person just by looking at them, and later realized it was also revealing something about you? If this reflection resonated with you, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Voice of Sufism, and turn on the bell icon so you don't miss future stories. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your reflection may help someone else see more clearly. And stay with us as you explore the related videos appearing on your screen now. Because every face is a sign. And every sign, if read with humility, leads us closer to understanding.